Hello, welcome to Double Strike Recap. Today I'm gonna review a 2012 American revisionist Western film, Django Unchained. Spoilers ahead. In 1858, Django, a slave, is chained to a bunch of other slaves and being marched to his new owner's estate in Texas by the Speck brothers. At nightfall, a German man in a dentist cart pulls up and hails the Speck brothers. He introduces himself as Dr.King Schultz. Schultz is clearly more intelligent and enlightened than the Specks. He says he is looking for a slave who can identify a band of wanted fugitives known as the Brittle brothers. Django announces that he knows the Brittle brothers and can identify them. Schultz offers to buy Django, but his polite and educated manner rubs the ill-mannered Specks the wrong way, and Ace Speck threatens to shoot him with his shotgun. In response, Schultz lowers his lantern, whips out a revolver, and shoots Ace, then Dickie's horse, causing Dickie to fall off his horse. The horse carcass then lands on and crushes Dickie's leg, leaving him screaming in pain. Crippled, he agrees to sell Django, and Schultz pays the man, for both Django and the dead Speck's horse, gets an official title to Django, and prepares to ride off. Before Schultz leaves, however, he frees the remaining slaves. Clearly, Schultz finds slavery abhorrent, and says that they may either carry the remaining Speck brother back to town, or shoot him and flee. As Django and Schultz ride off, we hear Speck pleading for his life. We hear a gunshot and can see blood splatter as Dickie's brains are blown out. Django and Schultz arrive in the small town of Daughtry near El Paso. As they travel through the streets, townspeople stop to stare in disbelief at the sight of a black man on a horse, much to Schultz's confusion. As Schultz ties his cart down at a hitching post, he checks some papers to make sure he's in the right place. The two then walk into a saloon, despite the fact that Django is forbidden from doing so because of the South's segregation laws. When Schultz insists on being served, the barkeep runs out of the saloon, Schultz calling after him to specifically bring the sheriff, not the town marshal. While they wait, Schultz pours beers for himself and Django and leaves money on the bar. He explains that he is no longer a dentist, but a bounty hunter in search of the Brittle brothers who are wanted dead or alive. He admits that although he knows the general location of the brothers, near Gatlinburg, they have adopted aliases, and he needs somebody who can identify them. Schultz tells Django that if he helps him bring in the Brittle brothers, Schultz will give him his freedom, pay him a $75 share of the reward, and let him keep his horse. Django immediately agrees, when, as if on cue, Schultz sees the sheriff coming down the sidewalk. The sheriff enters the saloon, shotgun in hand, and tells Schultz and Django to leave. The two comply, and exit out the swinging doors. We see that a number of townspeople are watching the spectacle unfolding as the sheriff asks them why they are coming into his town and showing themselves with the sole purpose of causing trouble. Schultz is silent, then steps forward. A spring-mounted derringer pops up in his right hand, and he shoots the sheriff in the stomach. The townspeople are stunned as the sheriff stumbles to the ground, moaning in pain from the bullet wound. Schultz walks around the wounded sheriff, aims his derringer, and shoots him in the head, killing him. The townspeople immediately run for their lives. Schultz looks up and tells the bartender that now is the time to fetch the marshal. The bartender runs off while Schultz and Django go back into the saloon to wait. The town marshal and most of the town arrive and train rifles on the front door of the saloon. Schultz hears that he has 100 rifles aimed at his head, and gets the marshal to agree to not have him shot dead like a dog in the street when he comes out. Schultz then exits, hands raised over his head, and a paper in his hand. He announces to the marshal and to the assembled townsfolk what has really happened, that the dead man the people of Daughtry saw fit to elect as their sheriff, who went by the name of Bill Sharp, is a wanted cattle rustler named Willard Peck, with a $200 bounty on his head. Schultz says that the paper in his hand is an official document from a judge that charges King with finding and bringing Peck back to the proper jurisdiction dead or alive. Schultz then suggests that the marshal pay him the $200 fee. Later, while camping, Django admits to Schultz that what he wants to do once he is liberated is buy freedom for his wife, a slave girl named Broomhilda von Schaft, who had been a servant of a German mistress before being sold into slavery in the U.S., their owner Karrakin. When they run away they were caught by the Brittle brothers. Karrakin then directed the Brittle brothers to sell the pair to separate owners, and to take the lowest price for Django. Django and Schultz eventually develop a plan to infiltrate an estate near Gatlinburg. They arrive at the plantation owned by Spencer Big Daddy Bennett. Schultz states he is looking to buy one of Bennett's slave girls for an exorbitant price, while Django is given free range to look around the estate. Django asks Bettina, his escort, if she knows of the Brittles. Bettina reveals that 3 overseer brothers known as the Schaefers did arrive in the past year. She points out the first one in the field. Django looks through his telescope and sees that it is Ellis. Django learns that Big John and Little Raj are on a different part of the plantation, about to whip a young slave girl for breaking eggs. Django appears and shouts Big John's name. Big John turns, stunned to see Django, who suddenly produces a derringer similar to Schultz's and shoots him through a Bible page glued to his shirt. He looks down at his bullet wound, stunned, as Django tells him, "I like the way you die, boy." Big John pitches forward dead. Little Raj attempts to grab his revolver, but Django grabs Big John's whip and uses it to beat him unconscious. He then takes the gun and unloads it into Little Raj, just as Schultz comes racing in. Django tells Schultz that Ellis is already galloping away across the cotton field. CA in his chest. Though Bennett is incensed when he arrives, he is forced to let them go once Schultz explains they are legally authorized to kill and collect these men. That night, out for revenge, Bennett calls out all the fellow white men of the plantation to kill Django and Schultz. As they surround the cart, one of the men spots what he thinks is Django and Schultz hiding under the cart. He peeks under, only to find that the bodies are actually bedrolls. Bennett wonders where the two bounty hunters actually are. In response, the scene cuts to Django and Schultz hiding in a tree a short distance away, Schultz carrying a rifle. Schultz says, "Auf Wiedersehen," and fires at the cart, setting off a bundle of dynamite hidden in the tooth on the roof of his cart. It blows up and kills most of the Klansmen. Bennett manages to survive the detonation and begins riding away. Schultz sees this and hands the rifle over to Django, letting him do the honors. Django tracks, and then fires, hitting Bennett and shooting him off his horse. Schultz realizes that Django is a formidable natural sharpshooter. King asks what Django will do now that he is officially free, and Django says he will locate his wife, believed to be in Mississippi, and try to purchase her freedom. King proposes to help Django rescue his wife, if Django will work with him over the winter in collecting bounties. Django agrees to King's proposal, finding him to be a deeply honorable man in spite of his line of work. King trains Django to not only be an expert with a gun, but also how to read and present himself in public. On one mission, Django shoots and kills the man, murderer and robber, in front of his son. +5, jumping forward to March 1859, once winter passes, the two head back to the south in search of Broomhilda. King discovers that she was sold to a man named Calvin Candie, the owner of a plantation known as Candyland. Candie is famous for breeding Mandingo slaves, who are bred to fight each other to the death, bare-knuckle, for their owner's amusement, and for betting purposes. King says that he will pose as a wealthy European who seeks to purchase one of Candie's Mandingos to take to fight in Europe, and that Django is his business partner and talent evaluator. That evening, Django and King arrive at a Candie's Cleopatra Club and they meet Candie's lawyer, Leonide Mogi, who explains that Candie is obsessed with French culture, although Candie, unlike the actually cultured King, does not speak French. The two are brought upstairs where they watch a Mandingo fight, which is very brutal and fatal for the loser, who gets his eyes gouged out by the winner. As Candie congratulates his winning Mandingo, the owner of the dead Mandingo, an Italian businessman named Amerigo Vespi, frets over the loss of his fighter and retires to the nearby bar for a drink. Django introduces himself to Vespi before he walks out, a clear homage and wink to the audience of the two Django actors in the same scene and the only time in this movie. It turns out that Candie is boorish and clearly arrogant and ignorant despite his wealth and high upbringing. Django is incredibly offensive to Candie and his guests, talking back to all the white men. Candie finds Django's rude and defensive behavior amusing and King to be charming. King and Django state that they are willing to pay an exorbitant amount, $12,000, for one of Candie's better Mandingos and they arrange to return with him to his estate. The next morning, the group travels in a convoy to the Candyland ranch. Django continues to act defiantly, insulting both slave and white man alike, and displays his intelligence. When King asks Django why he is so belligerent, Django says he is playing his role in this dirty world. Candie states that he believes 1 in 10,000 black men are exceptional, and believes Django to be one of those rare few. Candie's slaves chased up a tree by some of Candie's white trash workmen and their vicious hounds. It turns out the slave, D'Artagnan, named by Candie after the hero from The Three Musketeers, a book written by Frenchman Alexandre Dumas, whom Candie admires, is a Mandingo who was caught running away. Candie convinces D'Artagnan to come down from the tree where D'Artagnan pleads he can't handle any other fights despite having won 3 in a row. Candie states that his slaves can't retire from fighting until they have won at least 5 matches in order for him to recoup his $500 investment in them, and that D'Artagnan must be killed. Schultz suddenly offers to pay Candie $500 to spare D'Artagnan's life, but Django, realizing such odd behavior would blow their cover, loudly declares that D'Artagnan isn't worth a single penny. Schultz, coming to his senses, agrees not to pay for D'Artagnan, And Candie has the slave ripped to pieces by the hounds as they all look on. Django glares at Candie, but imagines himself reunited with Broomhilda to keep his anger suppressed. We'll see you in part 2. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.